Good day, everybody. Thrilled to be back with you and glad that you can join this conversation through Hospitality Talks. Leadership continues to be a highly debated topic. Business executives have always had varying perspectives on the approach and qualities necessary for effective leadership. Organizations like Hershey, DuPont, Kohler were model of great labor practices at their peak. Leading in turbulence presents additional challenges to be successful with far more complexity, rapidly changing environment, and everything being thrown at the leaders to attend to. Great leaders adapt to their surrounding environments and empower the team to succeed together and pursue value creation in good times and bad. I'm Abbott Butt. Our fabulous panel today will help us understand the specific attributes needed to be successful in work life today. And as always, I'm here with my co host, Sam Eric Ruckman. Sam.
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to have this discussion because we seem to be getting over the difficult times with the pandemic, even though it's not 100%, we're not there yet, but it also had a tremendous impact on leadership over this period, and also not only that, but the employees who have left the industry. So there's always a challenge as how are we going to motivate them to come back, and what are the things that the companies would need to do in order to entice them to come back and be the asset that they were originally in these hotels. So let's start with the conversation.
Well, let's bring the panelists in, Sam. We're thrilled to have Samantha Crowe, who is founder and CEO of Evalia Consulting. Dr. Crowe is a leadership and transformation coach who believes in the power of brave, humanized living and leading. Sam now coaches across sectors and industries, including nonprofit, Fortune 500 companies, and the US military. She uses a whole person approach that starts with lead thy whole self. Her superpower is creating a brave spaces with empathetic presence, levity, and full appreciation of what makes humans humans. We also have today Richard Smith, who is Vice Dean of Corporate and Global Partnership at Johns Hopkins University. Dr. Smith is Professor of Practice and Vice Dean for Education and Partnerships. Prior to joining Johns Hopkins, he served as the Deputy Dean of Education Programs at Singapore Management University, where he was a professor of strategic management. With a long career both in industry and academia, he has lived and worked in North America, Europe, and Asia, developing the insights that formed the core of his research and teaching interests, particularly human capital as a strategic resource for competitive advantage. And last but certainly not least, Alma Seidel, who is with the VP Human Resources with Real Hospitality Group. She's the keeper of the culture in all people functions within the organization, ensuring strategic planning and direction, providing the organizations with the best people and talent available, and positioning the company as employer of choice within the industry. A career leader in client service management and human resources, Alma also serves on the HR Council of American Hotel and Lodging Association. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you here. Welcome to Hospitality Talks.
Thank you for having us.
Great to be here.
Thank you. Alma, we're going to start with you to lead us out of for this discussion. Talk a bit about what it has been like doing more with less as we have gone through the last 18 some odd months of this pandemic.
Thank you. So I don't want to presume anything. I'm not sure what exact experiences other people have had, but certainly when the pandemic hit and America stopped traveling, corporate business wasn't traveling, leisure wasn't traveling. We were suddenly faced with changing our hotels from 20, 30, 40, 50 people to just a small staff there, in some cases only 2 or 3 people. So suddenly, and fortunately for Real Hospitality Group, we had leaders in place at all of our properties. And I can honestly say that that's the case where they had come from the ground up with their background and experience, and they were able, even though we had to do things quickly, to adjust and figure out what had to be done, how they were going to do it, how they were going to rearrange the floors at the hotels, the housekeeping, the guests that were staying there, which were different guests than what we were used to, and then making sure that they were able to keep the hotel functioning and operating, even though things had changed drastically, like the clientele, the occupancy a little bit, and of course the rates for the owners and the Real Hospitality Group third-party management company. So we had to quickly focus on doing more with less. The general manager, and in most cases just the chief engineer, had to become all things to everybody. So working the front desk, making sure that the rooms were maintained and cleaned. Maybe we had an executive housekeeper that was on board, but just a few days a week. We had to quickly adjust. And so recalling back to where you came from, I want to say, where we all started in the hospitality industry, doing the things that it takes to be in the hospitality industry was key. And I have to say that I'm proud of the team that we had in place, because the general managers, the chief engineers, and the housekeepers that we were able to keep on did an amazing job at making sure they took care of the hotel through the 18 months. And I can also say they were very tired, and they still are tired. But with that, we did more for less. And then, of course, navigating what the brands were going to do and what was going to stay in place and what wasn't going to stay in place. We quickly got to the point where we weren't going to clean rooms every night. So for the guests that were staying in the hotel, they could ask for different amenities that they needed, but for the most part, housekeeping was not coming in and out of the room every night. It was only on when they were checking out. So that changed quickly, which I don't want to keep talking in case there's a question, but we quickly had to shift where our priorities were going to be with how we were going to take care of our members, our loyalty guests, and the people that frequent the hotel on a regular basis from that perspective.
Alma, you bring up a great point. The human resource discipline and all industries today, they're talking about the great resignation, where people are leaving their industries in droves. Hospitality has not been immune to that. For the longest time, the general consensus was, in US at least, that it was the unemployment benefits that were keeping people away. But as late as this morning, when I was reading an article, they said even though the unemployment benefits have run out in most of the states, the number of applicants have not grown dramatically, which is really counterintuitive to what we were expecting. What has been your experience?
A little bit of that, but mostly I want to say that working in hospitality, you have to have heart. And what I mean by that is every single day that you wake up in this industry, you have to want to come to work, and you have to know what the job requires. And what the job requires is, number one, caring about people. So caring about the guests, caring about the hotel, caring about your fellow coworkers, understanding, just having a holistic understanding of what's required in this industry has to be the thing that wakes you up in the morning, that keeps you coming in to work. And some people along the way of the pandemic just frankly got burned out with that. And it's hard to get that mojo back in some cases, especially when guests kept coming. They were just different guests. because of the unemployment situation and because of the extra subsidy and unemployment. People had extra money, and that's not a bad thing, and it's not a political statement when we talk about that. It's just that things changed, and sometimes we found ourselves in a place where people were staying in the hotel for periods of time, 2, 3, 4 days a week, maybe longer, that never really experienced how to stay in a hotel. And so we had damage, we had extra dirty rooms, we had, the carpet. It started to be that it took us more than a day to clean a room before we could have another guest come in and enjoy the space. So after 18 months of that, it wears you out, and we completely understand that. And so some people said, I'm not doing this anymore. I don't think this is the industry for me. And in some cases, they may be gone forever. And in some cases, maybe they just need to rejuvenate. But our experience has been that a little bit of that contributed to the extra hard work and moxie that you needed to have to come into this industry every day and take care of what you've always taken care of. So,
well, is that still true? Though boomer generation, which certainly I'm part of, and I grew up in this industry, and I have absolutely loved every minute of what I have been able to do and contribute. But is that really true in the future leaders? As a matter of fact, the article this morning talked about the general consensus that the workers are feeling all across the industries, that if you died today, your job will be posted before your obituary is. And if that's the mindset that the workforce has, that does not bode very well for work life. Any thoughts on that?
what's hard for us now is convincing people that working actually adds value to your overall well-being. I find and I see, and I'm very connected to the hotels and the people in our portfolio, is there are people that are, like you say, the boomers who just have this in their blood. They love it. They know what to do. They'll do what it takes. But the current worker, in a lot of cases, doesn't see this business as a career. And from day one, when I started in hospitality, which was 11 years ago, I wondered how we could make hospitality housekeeping a career. And there's things for me that could be thought of a little bit different, so that when you put that uniform on in housekeeping, you're proud of how you look. You're proud of what you're wearing. You see yourself as part of a bigger picture as opposed to just the cleaning person in the hotel. So the current worker, it's hard to convince them that this is a career. They can learn, they can grow, they can get to the top of that particular department or that particular hotel. It just seems to take more work these days to convince people that this is the place to be and stay, and ever changing. So that's what makes it fun.
Yep, absolutely. Let's pivot a little bit about the HR discipline. How has this discipline evolved over a period of time? And we briefly spoke about that when we were on the phone. It appears more and more that HR is playing the role of regulatory police as opposed to human resources and developing relationships with workforce. Tell me what Real Hospitality has done to attend to that.
Okay, so yes, we have to pay attention to what the laws are, what the guidelines are, what the different federal, state, local mandates have been. In fact, our handbook has changed so that it's brief in terms of how you work and carry yourself in our particular company, but a third of the book has to do with, what's the different state mandates or situations that you have to consider when you're making decisions against your handbook. So what we do is we, of course, have to follow the law, but we educate people ahead of time. So in our orientation process. It's friendly for starters. So I think if you asked anyone in our portfolio what was the HR department like at Real Hospitality Group, they would say yes. There are things, there are guidelines, there are rules, there are things that have to happen, but our HR department explains to us early on what that is, how we navigate, what it means. They're available and accessible to answer our questions. And so it doesn't feel so strict like that. And we are engaged at our property. So we're not sitting here in the corporate office. And in fact, in some of our hotels, we have HR right on property. Because we want people to feel like they have a place that they can go, not just for the legal stuff and the problem stuff, but to be their ally, to be their counselor, to be the person that helps them make the things go away that they might have had to leave at the door so that they can actually focus on what they're doing and be happy at work and provide for the guests. So that's how we try to navigate and operate here at Real Hospitality Group. It's about being part of the team, not the person with the hammer all the time.
Fair enough. I mean, that changing that mindset that it's not just a gatekeeper, I think it takes a real cultural change, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But let me turn it over to Sam at this point. Alma, I'll be right back with you. Sam, I think you muted.
That's the way it goes. But I hope you hear me and see me now. I was reading and watching with real interest about the Real Hospitality website, and you talk about celebrating diversity and inclusivity. And I think it's a very important part, not even from the Europe and other parts of the world that I've been associated with. But I was looking at the survey, and one of the things talked about that today's employees are looking beyond financial remuneration and want to be part of a work culture where they are valued and can make a positive contribution, and the growing movement to purpose-driven employment and working for companies that are corporate citizens and give back to the community. So employees want to join companies that have vested interest in their well-being and in making the world a better place. So it's the well-being thing, which is very important to many people who are looking for jobs, and also with the thinking about the sustainability, they're also looking for a company to work with that has in their interest to make the world a better place, if you will. So could you talk a little bit about those two things, about the well-being side, and actually it means sustainable employment, and also how do you see the hotel industry could do better to make the world a better place for their employees and also for the guests? It's a big question, but maybe if you can give some few pointers for the audience.
I can. So when I came to Real Hospitality Group and the hospitality industry, I previously was in manufacturing. I'm sure that you looked at that. And in manufacturing, it's a very diverse world, especially on a production floor. And what I learned early on in my career is that the best teams are those teams that are diverse, that come from all backgrounds and places that can add value to whatever has to be done and whatever decisions have to be made. And I've carried that through my entire career. I think other people have that same idea, but I don't hear anyone talking about it as much, or at least where I was and in what I do, I don't hear people talking about it as much. And we're very happy to talk about diversity and equity and inclusion and what we can do to take care of the communities where we work. And so again, in our new hire orientation, we talk about who we are, what we do. If you're new to the hotel industry, the people that you'll see coming through. But in addition to that, we talk about doing something else besides providing good places for people to stay. And that's about taking care of the communities that we work in. So we have a corporate responsibility platform and a Real Cares program that goes along with that. And what we do is we encourage all of our hotels. And again, we talk about it in new hire orientation, which everyone must go through in the first 30 days. And we give them ideas about how they can support their communities and what they can do to get together at least once a year to do the things that are important in the specific community they're at. And in addition to that, we work on it at a corporate level. So each month that there is something to celebrate or recognize, like October is breast cancer month. It always has been. We all know that. September is Feeding America. We, from a corporate level, put out the information and the websites and the signups for all of that stuff so that it's always out there for people to grasp and take advantage of. So if it's not at top of mind after they leave their orientation, then it's always top of mind. We make sure at Real Hospitality Group that everyone is aware of what this month is celebrating and how they can help and what they can do in their local community. And we do that, believe it or not, through our talent acquisition and development department. So that department takes care of not just bringing in great people and making sure that we have a good, diverse workforce, but they also take care of the corporate responsibility for the organization. So we do a lot.
Yeah, I can see that. Thank you. A lot of the people who are left the industry for whatever reason and are reluctant to return, they are looking for more than the financial benefits. Do you think that the industry could do more? I mean, considering we have people who are can be single mothers, or they are working housekeeping, and they are obviously looking for not only for the hourly pay, but also looking for something else that will look after some well-being. Are there any drive now to see to work more to make them feel that that the company takes care of them in a different way? I mean, in Europe and in Northern Europe, of course, we have a number of benefits that I'm not going to refer to them, but I'm just saying that there are paternity leaves, maternity leaves, there are all kinds of things that are given as a benefit in the system that will help the employee feel that they are. It's not only the place for paycheck, but there is also a company that provides a well-being for them. So, any thoughts on that about the well-being side?
Yes. So, with our benefit platform, we have always been looking for a benefit program that has a really good wellness program that goes along with it. And so this year, I'm happy to say that with our benefit program, people are thrilled. I haven't had many phone calls about anyone complaining, but it's because we have a wellness program in place that provides them with a nutritionist if they're interested in pursuing that. They can join groups that are on weight loss programs and do something similar to what we're doing right now, and get together every week like the old-fashioned Weight Watchers program, where you went to a place and you got in a room and you had the support group and you got ideas. We can do that now through our wellness program with our benefits provider. They also have an opportunity for people to sign up and join to learn how to help themselves financially. So people that aren't aware of how to manage their money or don't know enough or are afraid to ask, they can sign up through our wellness program to be on the financial webinars, where they can speak live with not a financial counselor, but people that'll help them with the basics of what they could do, the simple things of just understanding your net worth, which is to some people a big word and they don't know why they should care about that, but understanding what your assets are and your liabilities and how you can add or reduce is helpful to people. And, you know, it even gets down to how to old-fashioned balance a checkbook. Today, you don't hear about that anymore, but it's absolutely important to understand where every dollar is, and people sometimes need that because they need every dollar. So our wellness programs are providing that now, and we have some other things like on our night shift now. We allow the night auditor to bring their pets to work, and it's a big hit with not just the person that's working there, because usually the night auditor is either by themselves or with just one other associate. So having the pet there helps with safety. It helps with companionship. If guests come down, it's a big hit with the guests. So little things like that make a difference. And we do care. And so when people need to go out on leave for maternity leave or for operations or whatever, we make sure we're proactive in explaining to them the benefits of FMLA, of medical leave, and personal leave, and why it's important that they should apply for it. It's not a bad thing. We want them to have peace of mind.
Well, that's terrific. I mean, I remember my days as a night auditor. I mean, definitely was out of the question. We just got some old sandwiches that were made by the kitchen the night before, and that was basically our pleasure of that besides work. But I'm glad things have turned around over the years, and congratulations for the kind of work you're doing. So, I mean, that's all I had for in questions. So over to you, Abid.
Thank you. Alma, one more question before we bring our next speaker in. Talk a little bit about building resilience in the industry moving forward. Hopefully, we will never have to deal with another catastrophe that we've dealt with thus far. But by all accounts, if it's not a pandemic, it's going to be something else. So, what can the industry do to build resilience?
So with Real Hospitality Group, we absolutely relied on the people who love this industry. Resilience is deep seated. It means that you never give up, that you're always looking for ways, that you're always listening, that you're always trying to figure out how to do things a little bit better, that you're okay with being engaged with your other fellow team members, that also want to make sure that the industry survives in a good way. So we stay very connected. The conversations can never end. Resilience is about, having good leadership, and, good leadership just means that you're not afraid to face the hard times, and that you show and teach people how they can come through it with you and what they can do to make it better. So I think staying connected to your people, we do it every day on a half-hour Zoom call with 40 of our corporate associates. We do it 4 times a week with our with our property associates. So we're all connected. We're all teaching each other. We're all making sure that we have the current information, and we're staying together, which is a strong building block to resilience. And we're finding the ways together that we can get our teams back and get people interested in the hospitality industry, and that's what we're doing. It's nothing magical. It's just being people.
Well, thank you, Alma, for all the insights. Please stay with us. We'll have you back in a moment. But I think that's a great segue, Sam. Let's bring Rick up. Rick, you have done a lot of work on this particular topic, but picking up from where Alma left off, managing hybrid workforce, that's totally new to a lot of us. As a matter of fact, for the longest time, it was frowned upon to work remotely. Maybe some salespeople were allowed to do that, but for most part, it was frowned upon. Tell us a bit about the advantages and challenges that we're all dealing with in this hybrid environment.
Yes, it certainly has been a big wake up call and maybe a challenge for a lot of organizations. And what I would say is that we seem to see corporations gravitating towards a few different models. One end of the spectrum, which is we're a physical workplace. When this is over, get yourself back to the office, get back here, and that's the end of the story. And so kind of in that mode. And then, I think on the other side of the spectrum, obviously we have, organizations that are saying, what, there's just a lot of advantage to this remote working hybrid workforce, model. And so we're going to do away with a lot of our offices. We're going to, just make this, a way of working. Now, there's obviously a lot in the middle in that spectrum. But a couple of things I think we have to also remind ourselves is that this is not an option for a lot of types of work. And so to the extent that, we're talking about hospitality here, to the extent that people need to come, to the hotel, they need to come to the restaurant, that this is just not an option, right? And I think that, so that is, I think, where we're starting to see perhaps some shift and migration of the workforce is, towards more flexible models. And so I think from an organization standpoint, we're starting to see where, firms are ending up on this. At an individual level, I think we're also seeing this kind of migration, in some cases, the great resignation, in terms of people really rethinking their personal preferences around work modalities.
Fabulous. Well, Rick, you've done also a lot of work with Great Places to Work Institute. Tell us what the latest findings are. What is it that the workforce is looking for, and how does that differ from, let's say, 8, 10 years ago?
Sure, sure. Yes, I work with the Great Place to Work Institute, and some people may be familiar. They publish the best places to work in different countries in different types of industries around the world, and they've been doing that for quite some time. And I work with them in a variety of capacities, looking particularly at some of the data that they gather from literally thousands of organizations around the world over the years, and millions of people every year that are surveyed. And a couple of things that we note from that's really shifted in the past year. Number one is that organizations that have developed what we call kind of a trust-based culture. In other words, employees feel like they're trusted by management. Management in trust people, whether that's through empowerment and other things. They fared better through the pandemic. They were able to kind of embrace the changes a little bit better than companies that had not invested in a trust-based organization, trust-based culture. Another factor is those leaders that took a more inclusive approach, with one, kind of active communication, two, kind of reaching out to people, and those leaders that are able to do that made a huge difference for their organizations, and I think that's something that's going to continue on. But I think that the most notable things that we see is one around what we call holistic wellness, and in here what we mean is really caring for that individual as an employee, but not just in the work context, but in a whole life perspective. And this gets a little bit to the prior discussion around wellness and well-being, and are people functioning okay during this time, whether that's family issues, other things along the way. And so I think that holistic wellness. And then the last thing that we really note, and I hope this kind of stays with us, is embracing humanity. The COVID-19 doesn't know the difference between senior executives and lower people in the organization. We're all human at the end of the day. And one of the things that we've noted, and we've laughed at some of the instances where kids burst into the Zoom screens, or pets decide to wander in the front of the cameras, and we're in people's living rooms, and that humanity, I think, is something that really shone through in the pandemic, and something that I think organizations are saying, there's something nice about that, and can we embrace that for the future?
Well, Rick, that you bring up a great point. Are these demands or wants, are they really new? Because as I mentioned, the likes of Kohler or likes of Hershey, they actually created townships for their staff. I know in Hershey, Pennsylvania, there was a park created just for their associates, and yet there was dissatisfaction. So is this really new that we need to be watchful about the humanity and human side of our workforce?
Yeah, it's a interesting perspective, because you're right. If we look back in hundreds of years, in some cases, to at least decades ago, a more paternalistic orientation around the workforce, and that's changed a bit. And so if we look at the US, we had probably a bit more of that orientation, even as early as the 1950s and 60s. Prior to that, with big family businesses, you mentioned Kohler, Hershey, DuPont Company, the Ford Company, all with a strong values orientation to how do we take care of people. And If the worker dies, do we take care of their family forever? And I think those types of things have gone by the wayside in recent decades. And work has become, in a lot of cases, a much more transactional. Some of that driven by regulation, some of that driven by kind of society values. And so we don't stay with the same employer, we switch jobs. We're much more mobile these days, and that is accelerating. And so is there, maybe two modalities as we think about this? Could we bring back some of that paternalistic orientation while at the same time we've got a rapid acceleration around the gig workforce, which is nothing but transactions along the way?
So, in this transactional environment, which quite candidly, a lot of the organizations are caught in that, we all march to the tunes of Wall Street. And it has become very transactional. You talked about the gig economy, where you go exactly that from one gig to the next. There might not be that continuity, there might not be that quote unquote loyalty. Talk a bit about that. What can the companies do, more importantly from hospitality perspective, what can we do to attract people, because there is a major exodus, generally speaking, across the industries, but certainly from hospitality?
Yeah, there seems to be this perplexing question, which is, before, when I had my help wanted signs up, I had applications coming in. I didn't have to work very hard at it, and there was just available talent that was looking for something. And even if it was, less than a year or short term, turnover was high in a lot of retail type establishments. And now, where are those people? I'm not getting the applications, and what is going on? What's quietly in the background is the rise of the gig economy, and whether we call that gig work, we sometimes think of the Uber drivers and things, but it's, I think, bigger than that in terms of freelancing, contingent workforce, and there's some startling statistics around this, and the number of gig workers is going at a pace of 3 times that of jobs growth in the U.S. And there's some projections that expect that 50 or 50 more percent of the workforce will be in the gig economy by 2027. And so, the question from an employer standpoint is, can I create an employment value proposition around those that want to stick with me for a long term, which is a bit more perhaps paternalistic. We have to rethink that value in terms of whether that's just pay, or maybe there's other benefits that we can provide. That Whether that's education benefits, other types of things that help really take care of that more holistic view of an employee, or can we embrace the gig economy and think about contingent workforce in a way that really makes sense for people looking for those opportunities? And if we're in the middle somewhere, it's kind of tough right now. And I think that's what we're seeing, I think, in some of the areas related to retail and hospitality.
Well, I'll turn it over to Sam here in a bit, Rick, but hospitality has been in a sort of conundrum, quite candidly, because it's a thin margin business, very heavy human capital dependent. There was a case that has been talked about over and over and over again about Dan Price, who is with Gravity Payments, that from one day to the next, he moved everybody's weight scale to 70,000 minimum. And pundits were saying that that was sure formula for bankruptcy, but in reality, his company's revenues have tripled. That local economy is booming, and people that he has been working with, they are far happier. Now, I'm not saying that all organizations are able to do that, but is there a reality to that? Do we need to understand the financial burden that the workforce is under these days?
Yeah, I know not everyone can do what Dan did with their organization. I think we all watched that with with admiration, but also a little trepidation to see what would happen with gravity. But it's an interesting example of really rethinking, what is going to work for people to stay, and that's that paternalistic, type of environment where, and we don't necessarily, not all businesses can obviously afford to do that, but are there other little things that, that can be done? In other parts of the world, they're helping employees with transportation to and from work. They're thinking about housing supplements and ways of helping them, on that front, or providing benefits that help with, kids' education, other types of things that, are able to address some of the needs that employees may have that, can really make a difference. I think on the other side of this is, are there some solutions that we need to think about that, are maybe addressing some productivity? And there's some interesting examples in China, in Singapore, in Japan, where they don't have some of the workforce solutions, and they've had to be innovative with technology, and particularly in the hospitality area. And there may be some lessons to learn on how do we change the model of work using some of those methods over time as well.
I think technology will be the biggest disruptor, at least in hospitality. Yet it is expensive, and hospitality industry is full of bunch of technophobes. So I'm not sure how quickly we'll adapt, but we'll come to that. Sam, over to you, please. Sam.
Rick, you mentioned about the technology, and I was wondering, we learn how to live with Zoom, and we learn how to work from home, and so on. Where do you see what's going to stay in the industry now and moving forward? Are we still going to have a combination of this hybrid working for those kind of jobs that is possible to do it? Where do you see the technology advancing and in the industry?
Yeah, Sam. I think that's really a burning question on the mind of a lot of people these days as we think about technology. I think there's a couple of ways that we're starting to see that play out. The forecast is, we need to think about it in buckets, right? So that knowledge workers have opportunities, to do this a little bit differently, and the projections are that more than half of all knowledge workers will be in some sort of remote/hybrid way of working, and that provides flexibility. And we're seeing that, not just the tech firms, but also even in financial services, other types of things that begin to shift that. One of the things I think where technology is also starting to maybe take more of a foothold is in those physical workforce locations. And these days we've all become adept at going to the restaurants and scanning the QR code instead of a menu, and being able to look at it that way. But could we took that a step further and just make our order that way? And if we go back to the example of China, they've leapfrogged into that in a lot of different ways. And this is pre-pandemic, mind you, where you're on a local app, you make your restaurant booking, you walk to the restaurant, it gives you your table, you make your order, you have no human interaction. The food is delivered to your table without, by somebody. So that's a person, working, but you pay your bill without interacting with an individual, and away you go. And that's at a nice, tablecloth restaurant, right? And I think we're getting more towards that way. And I think we'll see more technology advances, even in those physical environments that are coming true through the pandemic, and the need, in this case, for restaurants of, eliminating contacts and other things.
Yeah. I was just thinking when we talked about gig economy, but also now there has been a little bit of a shift also in certain hotels where they are starting to hire small companies which are just a number of chefs, and they're having like a ghost kitchen. So rather having a permanent workforce for this, they're handling special events and so on. And I see in some hotels that rather having their own housekeeping staff, there's a team of housekeepers that have formed their own little company, and they are providing those housekeeping services for a number of neighborhood hotels. And so I was just wondering whether now we are in a shift from this very traditional structured hotel business to, in a way, a gig economy business. What do you think?
Absolutely. It's interesting. There's also been some interesting areas with other retail establishments. If you think about the car repair chains that repair whether mufflers or tires or those kinds of things. Well, when that business started to slow down, the mechanics, some of them got together and did exactly what you're talking about, Sam, which is, well, wait a minute, do we need this company? Why don't we just create a group of us, and we'll provide our services to either multiple locations or as a freelance service where we go out to people's homes and provide the car service. And so they're disrupting employees, in fact, disrupting perhaps a bit of the workforce model of their employers. And I could very easily see the same with housekeeping in hotels, the way that food is provided, in some cases. We talk about room service in hotels. Does that really need to come from the hotel at all? And so I think rethinking some of those traditional ways and assumptions we have about the business, and sometimes the workforce is already thinking about that for us.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting times, really. I mean, when restaurants had to start to reinvent how they're going to handle the pandemic, Instagram became the world's largest takeaway menu, because all the restaurants were putting their pictures of food, and people then start to get active in ordering the food. And then when the people are staying on a staycation in hotels, they in fact are ordering all their meals from outside, from other restaurants, and have it delivered rather than using the hotel's expensive room service. So definitely a shift. Yeah. Well, Rick, thanks very much. I'll hand it over now to Abid.
So, Rick, let's fast forward, hopefully no more than 3 or 4 months, and we'll be on the other side of this pandemic. What can we look forward to in the workforce? I know I might be being a bit optimistic, but what would the workforce look like? What would the office environment look like? What will be different?
Yeah. Well, I think we're all trying to figure that out as we do look forward. I think one of the things that I think we're going to be tested in, maybe the traditional office tower environment, and I'm in one here today. Is okay. Well, when is this group coming in? When is that group coming in? And perhaps a bit more of a scheduling, if you will, around interactions. And I think a real questioning about where is the value of physical interaction. And research would point us towards, well, maybe that's geared towards innovation, maybe that's geared towards problem solving, where live in-person interaction can really play a role. And I think we're starting to differentiate between things that can be done best in person. And guess what? Even if we're in the same location, sometimes it's better to be on Zoom or Teams or technology platform, because we can be more productive. And so differentiating those areas, I think, is one. The second thing I think that we'll have to look forward to is perhaps more creative ways of thinking about office location. And some organizations are saying, maybe we don't need everybody to come into the big city to the office or location, and maybe we ought to have satellite locations where people can have options to get together, or we don't even have our own dedicated space. We kind of crash the local Starbucks, and or we co-opt a meeting room at the local hotel, who would be happy to have us usually, and use those types of third party spaces. And so I think we're going to see more creativity around that. We're going to see more organizations continue to reduce their commercial real estate footprint and offer some of these more creative options for job sharing, workspace sharing, and a lot more flexibility in separating both, kind of time and place continuums for their workforce.
Excellent point. It might turn out to be a scattered workforce that behaves slightly differently and gets together at a different time. One personal anecdote that I would like to share. Since the pandemic, a lot of the doctor consultations have been on Zoom, and I must say, unless they of course have to poke and prod you, if they were just going to say, hey, go have your blood chemistry done or go have an X-ray done, I'd rather do that on Zoom as opposed to go wait in that miserable waiting room when they're running late. So I personally have gotten used to that. Rick, I know you pressed for time. Really appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much for your input. We'll have to have you back, but thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much. Great to be with you.
Thank you. Sam, let's bring Dr. Crowe up. And I'm going to have to be very careful when I say Sam as to who I'm talking to at this particular point. So please bear with me. Sam, you heard Alma and Rick talk about some of the challenges that we're dealing with. Now, you have the approach from humanistic side loud and clear, though we might have known over the time period, but yet, why aren't we practicing that?
Well, I think if I had the answer to that, I would be in like a huge yacht right now. That's the $1 million question. I think it's like anything else. Humans, like, we're logical and we're not. And I think, we talk about stress and overwhelm. Alma brought that up, and it's such an important point when we look at things like the Great Resignation. We know, when I say we, neuroscientists, psychologists, and I think sort of everyday people, we know what we really need to be well, and we don't do it. It never really becomes a priority, and there's complicated reasons for that. But at an individual level, we know that human piece is important, and yet it gets very little of our time and attention. And these are broad generalizations, of course. Some of us are very good at giving those things time and attention. So it's not surprising that collectively we have this collective behavior of, our gut knowing that it's important, but wanting it not to be as important because we have these other things we need to focus on, right? We need to hit our targets. We need to make our shareholders happy. We need to keep the trains running. And, there's some trade-off decisions that have to be made when we talk about, like, we have to get serious about the human side. And I think we've been able to get by, sometimes not well, but as we look forward into a future where flux becomes the new normal, right? It's not this aberration, we have this flux and then it's going to go back to normal. Like, we're living in constant flux, and I don't know if that's going to change. I'm not sure ignoring the human aspect is going to allow us to thrive and maybe not even survive. And so I don't have a good answer other than we don't do it at the individual level that well. Collectively, we haven't. We've scraped by. And as we look at what COVID has taught us, what the social, environmental, political flux has taught us over the last few years, and we look to the future, real transformation is likely going to be needed. That would be my prediction, and I think the prediction of others.
Well, Samantha, the excellent point. Yet, if you look across, and I don't have any empirical data, so I'm generalizing here, I must say. Yeah. But if you, first of all, mental health is not even recognized as an ailment in most of the cultures of most of the countries. Put that on top of an organizational behavior, stress, burnout, being left out. These are all emotions that we don't know how to deal with, and we don't have counselors that we can go to get help. What do we need to do to make that transition?
Yeah. Well, I think, step one, right? Like when we're not sure where to go, you just do the next right thing when things are fuzzy and uncertain. And I think step one is just acknowledging, what's really getting in our way. And we have the data. We know that somatic and emotional intelligence has long been ignored, and that without addressing our somatic and emotional skill sets, we're going to continue to struggle with things like uncertainty, risk, change, conflict, working with and through others in a way that is generative and powerful. We're going to continue having these challenges if we can't build those skills. So step one is recognizing, what is it that we need? And step two is making we need brave leaders across industries to make some really risky decisions about playing with new solutions that address these needs that we're talking about. And what those solutions are, I think, are going to vary, but absolutely, like at minimum, how are we tending to mental health and mental wellness needs, right? If someone breaks their arm, right, the health insurance will cover for them to get it casted, right? But what do we do for those needs? At a basic level, how are we really tending to stress and burnout and overwhelm? We need to really think about what resources would we even begin to play with, and do we have some courage to begin playing with those? Because it's uncertain, right? It's change, it's uncertain, it's diving into a territory where there's going to be critics, there are going to be people saying you can't do that. You talked about giving everyone a $70,000 salary, right? Like it's going to take courage to do some of these things. I go into organizations all the time and I do deep psychoeducational work in the context of leadership. I deliver Brene Brown's Dare to Lead program, Timothy Clark's The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety program. We talk about things like, your window of tolerance. These are things that used to be reserved to a therapist's office. And it's not therapy, but they're just concepts that's where they were appropriate to discuss. And so we're bringing these now into the work context. And I have, a dichotomy of reactions. I have leaders and executives and people being like, oh my gosh, like light bulbs. And why are we not talking about this? And I want to act on this and I'm going to build these skills. And I have other people who are like, this doesn't belong here. Why can't people just come, be adults, get their work done, leave that at home? Like, this isn't a therapist's office. And so we see everything from full embrace to this doesn't belong here. And so we have to start finding the field where those two opinions meet to start.
Well, you bring up a good point, because all along we have been taught to pull our socks up and get on with it, versus what do I have to get in touch with my feelings? I don't even know I'm stressed out, and I might be
Yeah.
behaving in a very erratic way. I don't know what impact is it having on me until it might be too late, until I've gone postal, or whatever that case might be. Any thoughts on what can organizations do that would help identify some of these its signs, if you would?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we're already seeing the signs, right? I think, do we know that that's the signs we're seeing? And as much as I'm not a big fan of starting with training and knowledge, because I think it's more than that, right? We do need a basic shared vocabulary. Like, what changes culture? How do you do transformative change? We need to start with a shared vocabulary. We need to start with enough awareness to know what we're even looking at and be able to say, this is the problem we're trying to solve and here's why it matters. And I think organizations at minimum can start expanding their aperture on what type of training, on what type of support they bring in to help folks recognize what they're seeing. So, this year more than ever, I have had more leaders in my coaching sessions come to me with the same symptoms that I haven't really seen in the past collectively, but just broad themes, right? They're either over functioning, right? Trying to control everything, working themselves to death, trying to engineer the vulnerability out of all this uncertainty we're sitting in, or they're totally tapped out. They like want to escape. They, we call it hypoarousal, right? Like they just are like, I don't know, I'm tired. I just want to watch Netflix. I just want to numb out. And so I'm having to do, and what would normally be like a typical executive coaching session where we talk about, okay, here's how you do your strategic thinking around this decision, or here's how you have this hard conversation, or, now it's moved to, okay, let's talk about what happens when you're in chronic vulnerability and stress, like just COVID. Let's take COVID, 18 months of constant change and flux, right? So we know our bodies start out ready to surge, right? We have energy. We saw people come together. Leaders were on top of it. Like, we'll figure it out together. And then our arousal systems burn out, right? And we get in this messy middle of like, I just want to quit my job or run away or join the circus or go to bed and not wake up for a few weeks because I'm so tired, right? And so, having to educate them that like, this is why you're feeling one of these two things. And when you're in 18 months of stress, your window of tolerance gets smaller and smaller and smaller. It's a form of traumatic stress, actually. And so what you can handle and respond to gets squeezed in that window. And so you'll find yourself in situations that you used to be able to step into and lead yourself through or address with some effectiveness. You'll find yourself feeling emotionally unwell, or you'll feel yourself unable to think, or you'll feel yourself in this like state of just anxiety, right? And so to circle back to your question, where can we start? We have to start with bringing these words that no one wants to use in the workplace into the workplace, so we have a shared vernacular, right? We have to talk about grief. We have to talk about shame. We have to talk about overwhelm. We have to talk about, I would argue, traumatic stress. We have to bring this in the context of how it impacts us at work and what the behavior outputs will be as leaders, as followers, and then here are the best practices, the evidence-informed practices for how we deal with them. And it's not necessarily therapy, but in some cases we might have to start talking about, when we talk about wellness, do we really need another yoga, once a week for our staff, or do we need to bring in real coaches and counselors and healers to help people? And that's a big change.
It's a huge change. To be honest, the only time those words what might have shown up might have been on our annual review, and in 90% of the times they might have had negative connotation, as opposed to that this is what we need to collectively work on to get better. Talk about the organizational culture. How do we transform that, and for that matter, why is it important? And I'll turn it over to Sam Eric after this, but if you wouldn't mind talking about organizational culture, how do we develop it? Is it really important?
Yeah. I mean, culture is everything, right? So, at the individual level, our habitual pattern thoughts and behaviors, those are our habits. As a group, right, our patterned thoughts, beliefs, behaviors, right, those are our norms. And then as an organizational unit or system, right, what we collectively have is our patterned beliefs, thoughts, actions. That's the culture. And we know that with culture shapes us and we shape culture. So it's hard to study because, both are independent and dependent variables. And we also know that we all touch culture. And so if we want to transform culture, right, if we want to have cultures that have higher trust, I heard we were talking about resiliency earlier. We were talking about how, what are some of the traits of organizations that are effective? High trust cultures. We know that high psychological safety cultures tend to fare better in this sort of state of constant change and uncertainty and drive for innovation. Like, we know that we need to transform to have cultures that have more trust, more psychological safety, more space for our whole human, including the emotional pieces, which we're feeling beings who think. I think Antonio Damasio, the famous neuroscientist, said that, right? We're feeling beings who think, not thinking beings who feel. So we need to transform the culture. It really, really starts at, we have to shift our actions, we have to shift our behaviors, we have to shift our beliefs, our values, right? And how we operationalize those. And language is a big important piece of that too, right? The words we use matter because words create. And so to change culture, it really is starting with, well, what is our culture, right? What's our culture and what's our shadow culture, which is usually our real culture, right? Like, what are our collective thoughts, beliefs, and behaviors? What is and is not okay here when we work with and through each other? And we have to start making commitments to change those. And that's habit building. It's how do we build new habits, because those are all habit loops.
So, just to add a bit of levity to this conversation, I'd like to tell a story. This outgoing leader of the organization left 3 envelopes for his successor and said, you can only open them once a year. So the incoming guy opens the first envelope and he goes, the board is going to be breathing down your neck. Blame the last guy. So the gentleman did exactly that. A year went by, the pressure was gaining. He opened the second envelope at the beginning of the second year, and the envelope read, well, change the team. So the gentleman took advice, changed all his team. Another year went by, the pressure is building up, the organization is still not performing well. Opens the third envelope, and the envelope read, prepare 3 envelopes for your next, for your successor. But that's the culture in corporate world that we deal with. With that, let me turn it over to Sam Eric.
Thank you, Abid. Yes, Samantha, I have this underlining word. I just wrote down the word empathy while I was listening to you. And obviously, in this culture, what role should empathy have in the company culture? And if it doesn't exist, or is it limited, what could be done in order to enhance it? Because I mean, I believe in the culture of empathy, where you really listen to somebody and sometimes use those fuzzy words to make people feel that you're close to them. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think my personal opinion, that might be biased given my neuroscience background, and empathy was one of my sort of specialties of focus. Like, I believe that it's everything, and still not enough, right? So empathy, first, I think it's a great question. Let's start with what empathy is and what it isn't. Empathy is the ability to tune in and understand somebody's internal state. And it can be cognitive. Like I see that it feel anger. I know what that feels like in me. And it's a felt sense. Like I can feel their pain. So empathy is just the ability to tune into someone and get a sense of what is going on inside of them. Empathy is not then deciding that we're just going to be nice, we're going to like hug them, we're not going to hold them accountable if they didn't show up for work 3 days in a row, right? Like empathy is just, am I tuning in to understand their perspective and their internal state, what their experience is? And can I do that without judgment? Just accept it, that that's their reality. What we do with that data, that understanding, is equally important, right? So there's compassion, right? There's I'm going to hold them accountable, but I'm not going to shame or judge them or make them fill out 3 envelopes, right? For their next successor. Like I'm going to have compassion, and I can still hold them accountable, right? Some leaders, highly empathic leaders, they take on the other person's emotions and they end up in what we call empathic distress. And so those are the leaders that care so much. They have no boundaries. They take on all of that pain. They take on all the work. They end up burning out and not empowering their people, right? And then there's the third kind of category, I'm oversimplifying it, was like, I sense what you're feeling and it doesn't matter. Just do your job. This is what I think. This is what I'm assessing. Here's what I think the solution is. Just go make it work. We know that that third one and that second one don't work so well. Both have outcomes that don't get us usually what we're trying to get to. So I think in terms of empathy, just defining what it is and isn't. And then in terms of its importance, empathy is fundamentally a necessary skill set for connection. Empathy is a fundamental skill set for cultivating psychological safety. We know from the research it's fundamental. It's one of the key skills to courage, the ability to lean into vulnerable situations and navigate them without armoring up or displaying fear or survival-based behaviors. We know that empathy is actually a good indicator of a person's ability to co-problem solve or be generative in conflict. Because when we are not leaning into empathy, either because we haven't built that skill or we're stressed or we're not tuned in or we don't think it's important, we often aren't solving the real problem to solve, right? I see you do this thing. I'm telling myself a story that it's about this, so you need to do X, Y, and Z. And if we had leaned in to really understand what's really going on, we would have realized that the problem that we needed to solve was something fundamentally different. And so, just not just care, connection, psychological safety, all those compassion, but it's fundamentally important to innovation and problem solving. So I don't know if my soapbox, you asked me the right question. We could do this all day. I think where people sometimes don't want to talk about empathy is because of the confusion about what it is or what it isn't. Like, I think many people think empathy is all about being like, just being caring and being like, oh, I understand and it's okay. And that's not necessarily empathy. Empathy is like, let's look at what's going on. I'm really going to understand your experience. I'm going to accept it as your truth. And we're going to talk about what needs to happen. And we're going to put whatever's going on in front of us rather than in between us, if that makes sense.
Well, that when we talk about emotional intelligence in leadership, would empathy be a very key component in evaluating somebody's leadership skills?
Yeah, so when it comes to emotional intelligence, and you could do a whole panel on emotional intelligence experts and they'll like nerd out fight over what are the components and whatever. But we know there's some we fundamentally agree on, right? Empathy is one of the components, right? If we are not able to either have a felt sense of what someone's experiencing, or at least a cognitive sense, like sort of a brain understanding, a thought understanding of what they're going through, the rest of emotional intelligence becomes really hard. So it is a component. Another component is emotional literacy. Are we able to identify and name accurately emotions in myself and in others? And I will tell you that in the United States, I won't speak globally because there's some differences among different regions and cultures, but we are really disembodied and really, really bad at being able to name emotions. Everybody's either angry, sad, or happy, like happy, sad, angry. And now some people will just say overwhelmed. They don't even know what they're feeling, right? And so, to get to empathy, we have to be able to identify and name accurately emotions. And so those two things go hand in hand. And I will tell you, when I don't do a lot of crisis coaching or intervention coaching, I usually coach high potentials, but there are some cases where I'll take on intervention coaching for very, very senior executives, right? I would say more often than not, what is getting in their way is a struggle with emotional literacy or a struggle with their empathy muscle. And they've gone this far in life, right? That it's really hard to figure out, how do we walk back? Like, how do we walk back to say, okay, right? Can we just start with, can you name more emotions than angry, right? Like, how do you feel? Angry. How are they feeling? Angry. They're not angry. They're scared. No, they're angry, right? Like, how do we move forward? And so, really brilliant people, brilliant business minds who what got them here won't get them there. And we have to rebuild these very, very basic human skills. And it can be hard.
Great. Thank you, Samantha. I learned a lot what you were talking about. So thank you so much for that. So over to you, Abid.
Samantha, Sam, Eric, let's bring Alma back in the picture, but I'll continue to ask the questions for Sam, at least at this particular point. Samantha, talk about social leadership versus pragmatism. All of us lean on quantifiable things. I must confess, I've always said that to bring about a change, you have to be able to measure it. A lot of the things that we have talked about today, they might not necessarily be measurable. How do we go about doing that? And there is a lot of research, a lot of work that has been done that pragmatism necessarily is not the best attribute in an organization. Your thoughts, please.
Yeah. Well, I started out as a scientist. So, I love data. I love it. I love being able to measure things. I think it's great until it's not. Right. One of my favorite colonels, I used to help him with reports to Congress, and he would get real frustrated that we'd have to do all of this research to really back up one or two key points. And he would say, Crowe, I don't need a thermometer to tell me it's hot in the desert, right? And so I think that, the whole point of that was there are certain things, I don't know if they're impossible to measure, but they're harder to measure. And we have to really talk about what does measurement mean and when do we measure, right? And what's important. I think that for things like, we'll just say with empathy, emotional literacy, there are ways to translate some of these human skills into behaviors that can be onboarded, trained, taught, observed, measured. We can get feedback on them. And when it then goes tying those to business results, right? And how do we measure the link? How do we tie the link between this person really built these human skills and really shifted the culture? It might be a little harder, right? It might be a little harder. And I think that at the end of the day, again, it goes back to the courage to be like, I might not have a great way to make a fancy graph to show my shareholders about how investing in this affected or didn't affect that. And I believe that this is fundamentally important because that's how humans work. And that's what the research is telling us. And until we have that great way to show the link, or we have the time to show it, we're going to take the risk. And it goes back to that takes courage because it's hard, right? And it's going to be the organizations who have learned from the last couple years that if we don't crack ourselves open and be willing to be in a bit of a learning lab, if we want to continue sort of being like fossilized in our culture and our thinking and our beliefs and how we measure results, we might not be around in 5 years, right? We talked about the move to gig, right? So, the thing about a gig worker, I love being a gig worker because I get to choose who I partner with. I get to choose what work I say yes to. If I'm talking with a company and they treat me like a vendor in the conversations and they don't value my work and they're trying to, I see how they engage with their people and me, and it doesn't align with my values, I'm just like, peace out, because I can choose to work with someone else. And so we're not going to lose these challenges of having to cultivate connection and care and trust with people just because they're not under our umbrella.
Thank you for that. Alma, question for you. As a general manager of a hotel, I've got 20 balls up in the air. I don't have time for all this touchy-feely stuff that Sam is talking about. Help me out here. How do I balance? You want me to add a few more balls. Don't have the capacity. Help me out.
What I can say to that is, and I wrote it down in my notes here to prepare for this conversation, is that the best hotels are run by the people who know that empathy and listening and communication and connectiveness are the keys to the fort, and they don't ask those questions. The people that don't even have that in their toolbox, then I want to say shame on us. We missed that in the interview process, because again, it takes heart, and heart means a lot of things. And I could listen to you, Sam, all day long. A lot of what Sam was communicating here on the podcast, I listened to forever in my master's program of organizational leadership, because those are the things that make organizations successful. And Sam is absolutely right. The companies that do not get that and do not figure out how to inject that into their culture may not be here in 5 years, because people absolutely see what you care about and what you don't care about from the get-go, and they know and are not afraid to make the decision not to come with you, regardless of what their financial situation is at the time. So I challenge that. That is not one ball in the air that can be compromised. It has to be there in the leadership, or there's no leadership.
Fair enough. You talk about listening skills, and at least that has been discussed in organizations all the time. For that matter, in our personal lives, that's talked about. If you ask my wife, you'll be told that I absolutely am horrible in listening skills. And that probably goes in our daily lives, yet that is such an important skill that all of us need to learn and improve upon. Talk about, Alma, back to you. Talk about some of the long-term and short-term concerns from leadership perspective in hospitality industry.
I'm frankly worried about burnout, whether you have these skills or you don't have these skills. Being emotionally intelligent and leaning in and listening and connecting and having the empathy is hard work. And it's not everybody's interest level. As I am interested in listening to Sam and what she has to say all day, and I've learned quite a lot on this podcast, thank you. It's hard for other people that this isn't in their DNA. And so if it's not in your DNA, then I worry about burnout from the other perspective of just constantly running and doing and trying to be organized and all of the other balls in the air. My personal opinion is, and I say it out loud all the time, and I said it on the manufacturing floor also, if you can help people by listening and at least making them feel better about what they might have walked in the door with, then production just happens, because you listened, you cared, you gave them some ideas to think about. They can breathe and take a deep breath for a minute, and they're happy to go on with what they have to do next. And sometimes they come back because they feel like somebody actually cares. And so caring is everything. And if you don't care, then I worry that you're going to burn yourself out on the other end with just running and doing and just not wanting to be here anymore.
Hey, Alma, our industry in particular, but generally speaking, we have always focused on functional skills versus a personality, though everybody talks about hire for the attitude and not for the skills, because they can be taught, but yet we always focus on skills. The very popular show that we can learn a bit about leadership, Ted Lasso, I don't know if anybody has seen that, but the person was hired to fail in his new role, not necessarily to succeed, but his leadership attributes helped him be successful. Can you shed some light on that? We always rely on skill because we don't have time to train people. Alma.
All right. Yep. I was thinking about that for a minute. The best example I can give you is my own example. I hope you don't mind me saying. I did warn you that you wouldn't have to be afraid. You might be more afraid of what I'm going to say in a podcast more than what you're going to ask me in a podcast. But I'm going to use myself as an example, and that is I'm not from the hospitality industry. I'm from the candy/electronics industry for 27 years. That's what I did. And when I started there in HR, everything became HR, because HR is HR and people are people, and how you handle people always transfers into whatever the next job is. Certainly, you have to have the aptitude for certain jobs to do them well, and skill is important. But in this industry, most of what needs to be taught can be taught. What can't be taught is what's in here, and the resilience and the strength that you have internally to want to do this work. So, so my
Okay.
example is when I said to Ben, and it's no secret that the CEO of Real Hospitality Group is my spouse. When he started the company 11 years ago, he said to me, "I think I'm going to do this," and I was done with my previous career, and I was here in Ocean City trying to navigate my way. And I said, "Well, do you need some help?" And he said, "No, you don't know hotels, and I don't want my wife in this business." And 2 weeks later, he said to me, and there's a hidden message here, "Well, maybe you could come in and watch the office and open the mail." And I said yes to that. Here's why. Because I knew what he was going to need. You can't start a company and have people gravitate towards you, and you can't say that you left your previous employment because of values and culture, and things that might have been missing for you personally. So he did that. He left his previous companies for things that weren't there that he valued most. And now I heard him say, but he didn't know he said it, I need to have this in my company, and I think I can do this, but you also need some help. So I went in and I opened the mail and I watched the office. And I think the first time I got my hand slapped was when I came in with the time clock. And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Do you want to have a time clock when you have 3 people, or do you want to wait to install it when you have 3,000?" And so it's about a couple of things there. Obviously, my
Yeah.
HR skills translated into the hospitality industry. People are people. They're just in other places in the hospitality industry, but structure is structure. And there were
Fair
some
enough.
things that I had to learn. So aptitude has to be there in some cases. Caring has to be there in all cases. Empathy definitely has to be top priority, and having the resilience.
Well, thank you. As Sam Eric, I know I can continue to talk. We have already run over, but any questions, thoughts from you before we wrap the session up?
Well, we don't have any comments from from our viewers, but I think it has been a great conversation here, and I think we were gravitating into the keyword of empathy, which I was really appreciated that it came up. And I have to listen to your podcast, Sam Crowe. I think you have, Samantha, you have a podcast, or are you talking about these topics? Then you should.
No, I don't. I like going on other people's shows. Like,
Okay.
why invent something that's already there? I come in, I give my soapbox, and I leave, and it's awesome.
No, I really appreciate your contribution, and Alma also. It's been really a pleasure.
So, in that case, one last question for both of you, Samantha and Alma. What'll be different in the next 5 years? Samantha, if you wouldn't mind starting.
Oh, I, I think that this is where cultivating presence and leaning into unfolding and uncertainty is a valuable skill, because I don't know where we're going to be in 5 years. I think we are on the cusp of some very large collective decisions as humanity. I think that I do feel like we are going to be shifting into that state of just constant flux, like not just expect the unexpected, but expect things to be unexpected. And so I think that's going to require different frameworks and different skills, and prioritizing different things when we think about not just leaders, but we didn't talk about followership, right? right? It's not just all in the leader's hands, but what does followership skills look like as we enter into this? And so I don't have a good answer, but I know that we need to be prepared to continue shifting and changing.
Well, we will have to have you back to talk about it for the next 5 years. But Alma, your thoughts?
Agree. And I think that where it's possible for the human interaction, as Rick was speaking about, to not be there, I think that's going to be different in 5 years. I think when we try to check into a hotel, we'll have pre-arrival selections to make, and they will have probably costs associated with them. And I think some of the things that he mentioned will definitely gravitate towards that when it comes to the amenities and the services and the food options and how you receive all of those. And I think we'll have an automated check-in. So I think we're going to see ourselves in 5 years with a very different front end to how you book and how you arrive and what you've selected ahead of time. Of course, we'll always need and have to have people. The other thing I think that it'll be changing is hopefully the education system, where some of this stuff can happen in the high schools and all along the way in schools, so that when people come out into the world, they have a little better grasp and understanding of the things that are required, not so much skill and knowledge, but the other pieces that we don't spend enough time with in school right now.
Well, an incredible conversation. Thank you so very much for your participation and insight. Samantha Crowe with Evalia Consulting, Alma Seidel with Real Hospitality Group, and Rick Smith with Johns Hopkins University. Really appreciate you being with us. We'll certainly have to have you back, because this time period is not long enough to have a conversation like this. Sam Eric.
Well, from my side, I'd like to thank the panelists again for a great discussion, and also like to thank the live viewers who joined us. And if you're watching it replay, please subscribe, because we're having many more interesting episodes coming up. This episode and our previous episodes can also be listened to as a podcast. So if you Google Hospitality Talks podcast, you will find us over there. So we're looking forward to seeing you either over at the podcast or watching us on live, or by all means watch us on our recorded sessions. So with these words, I just want to close out and thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, so. Thank you both.
Thank you.